I would say at this point that the whatever you thought about the republic and about the democracy is over, and we don't have to worry about losing our democratic process because it's already gone. Now, and by the way, I mean that sincerely, without hyperbole. We don't have the same political system we had 10 years ago, and nobody decided to make it that way. Right. We didn't have a national conversation about, hey, let's change our government by really putting the social media platforms largely in control of this stuff. Nobody made that decision. It just sort of evolved that way. That's what we got. Let me talk about a little poll I'm doing on Twitter right now. Some of you have seen it. I did a poll and I asked how many people have had the experience of following me on Twitter only to have Twitter's system, for one reason or another, unfollow them so that they had to later follow me again. And so I did a Twitter poll. Now, first thing you need to know is that the Twitter poll is not scientific. It doesn't mean that these numbers are accurate in the way that you would like a poll to be accurate. All I was trying to find out is if there are a lot of them or not a lot of them. And I thought, for that purpose, it doesn't matter how scientific it is. There will either be a lot of them or there won't be a lot of them. So here was what I found out. So over 8,000 people have responded to the poll. From the beginning, from the first 100 or so people who responded, approximately 17 or 18% were saying that they had the experience, sometimes more than once, of following me and then finding out that they had been somehow unfollowed. And what's interesting is that as that number of people who answered the poll grew from a few hundred to now close to, I think, 9,000, for most of that entire time, the ratio of people who said that their follows had been unfollowed, on my account specifically, stayed around 17 to 18%. Does that mean something? I don't know. It could easily not mean anything. But I asked myself, that is a very consistent number. I would have expected to see more fluctuation. I would have expected that maybe it started out being a big number and shrunk over time, but it stayed consistent at around 17 to 18%. Now, as many people pointed out, some developers pointed out, and Twitter themselves had explained this to me as well, there is a real situation in which this can happen through just normal error. And the way it works is if you've got your device in your hand and you're in the app on Twitter and you say follow, it's first recorded in your app. So the only place it exists at first is on your phone. It doesn't exist at Twitter yet until that signal is sent to Twitter. Twitter, recognizes that there's probably some kind of a digital handshake that says, yes, we got it. You don't need to send it again. Now, apparently there are fairly frequent times when you lose a connection or just that handshake between Twitter and your phone doesn't work. So you can have times when you think you've liked something, you think you followed somebody and it didn't get registered at Twitter, and then the next time you check, it's not there. So that's some of it. So I would say it is confirmed that sometimes that happens. Likewise, it is confirmed that probably people think they followed me and didn't. Probably confirmed that they pushed the wrong button. They thought they followed me, but they liked it. They remembered it wrong. So some of it's probably human error and bad memory and all that. But I now have, I think, over 1,500 people. 1,500 people said that they followed me and got automatically unfollowed. About 18% of all the people answered. Do you think that 17 or 18% of all the people who followed me had a technical error? Maybe. If you added the possibility of technical errors to confirmation bias to the fact that the poll is not scientific, so it may be skewed quite a bit just naturally. If you added together all of the possible reasons why people would have the impression that they were unfollowed, could it get to 18% of all my traffic? And maybe 18% is not accurate because it's not a scientific poll. I don't think so. I can't rule it out. There's no way I can say it's 100% chance that something weird is going on here. But as I've said before, if you can't tell and there's no mechanism to know, so I have this question. It's suspicious. It's suspicious by its nature. If I can't tell if that's really stopping me or not, then democracy, or the republic, as we call it, does not exist. Because it means that the social media companies can do anything they want. And they can put their finger on the scale any way that they like, and nobody's going to know the difference. There's no mechanism to check. Now, you may say to yourself, well, wouldn't it be more obvious if they were doing this? And of course, a lot of people think it is obvious, but confirmation bias is too much of a possibility there to know that just people thinking they see it means anything. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. But let me draw a picture to tell you how dangerous this is. Some people, when I made the comment that social media has eliminated really the democratic process for all practical purposes and concentrated it with the few people who can control those platforms, people said to me, Scott, we've always had the news, and the news has always been fake news. So if you went back to the 1920s and read a newspaper about politics, it probably wouldn't be all that accurate. And so we've always lived in a world in which our democracy was greatly influenced by big companies. In the past, it was more just the news. In the present, it's the news plus the social media. So nothing's different, Scott. Why are you talking about this? But here's the difference that they do not account for. If you go back to the 20s or the 50s or any time in the past, or even 60s, 70s, or 80s, you could go back to the 90s, and it would be completely different than today. And the reason is that we now know so much more about how to influence people. We know what works in general, and we can rapidly test it to find out if it did work. And we have so much better analytics, we know how to get the exact message to the exact person, the type of message that affects the right person, and we can even tell what kind of people might be influenced and which ones not to bother with because they'll never change their mind. Imagine all of that technology, that knowledge, that ability to measure and to influence people. Nothing like that ever existed before. And the public at large is unaware of it. The average member of the public doesn't know that the technology and the knowledge of how to influence people has gone from, the Wright brothers barely getting an airplane in the air to putting a rocket on Mars. So if you say, it's no different, we had newspapers then, we've got social media now, it's all fake news, nothing's that different. Completely wrong, because we didn't know how to do it until I'd say the last several years. That's when we started getting really good. That's when AI got into it, and the deep dives into the data, when we really knew who everybody was. People lost their privacy, and we could tell even a slight difference in a color on an interface or a headline, the way it was worded, and we could tell which ones stimulate people and which ones don't. Now, as good as we are at the moment at influencing people, consider, and I said this yesterday as well, consider that we will have had 4 years from 2016 before the next election in 2020. The smartest people in the universe, who are the tech people, the people who work at the big tech platforms, let's admit they are some of the smartest people in the universe, as far as we know, or let's say the solar system. And they have a great incentive to do better at influencing elections. They have the means, they have the intelligence, they have the time, they have all the resources, and they've got everything they need. And by 2020, they will be able to completely determine the results of an election. Let me give you a specific example. Suppose they found out, and I think this is all discoverable, it's something that they could find out. Suppose social media found out the people in the electorate, the voters who could be influenced. So they start with all these people, all the people who vote, and they know that most of them are going to vote their party no matter what. Most of them are going to vote or not vote, and there's not much you can change. It's hard to turn non-voters into voters. It's hard to change people's party. But there's some small sliver of people who can be influenced, and I'll bet they can be identified. All right? So step one is, can the social media platforms identify the small group of people who can be influenced? I'm sure they can. I'm sure both parties can do it. I'm sure that this is available information. Once you've identified the people who can be influenced, can you change the ratio of messages they hear from one side versus the other side? And could you do that without being noticed? Well, if you took all of the people who were looking at me and you said, all right, let's mess with Scott. We've identified that Scott is unusually persuasive because he has training and because he has a large following on social media. So those two things are the first flag. He's persuasive, he knows how to do this, and he has a large following, so it's a big platform. So suppose they said, why don't we just change how his message gets to not the whole group, because the whole group is largely can't be persuaded about anything. But suppose we only limit his message to the few people who could be influenced. Would I notice? And what would that look like when I looked at my traffic? What it would look like is that I didn't go down by 90%, because I would notice that. It wouldn't go down 80% or 70% or 60, 50. I would notice that. 40, I'd notice that. 30, 20. At around 20, I can't tell. So if I were going to game the system, I would make sure that the only people who didn't see Scott's message are the people who could be influenced, and that can't be more than 17 or 18% of the public. I mean, and that would be generous, probably is closer to less than 5%. So I can't determine if anything inappropriate, illegitimate is happening in my case. I cannot make that determination. But I can say with complete certainty that if someone wanted to game the system, they would look for people like me, and you could probably make a small list of the other people that would be on the list. You know, you'd see Jack Posobiec, you'd see Mike Cernovich on the list, you'd see, you could make your own list of, 50 people. Let's say if you took the 50, maybe 100, let's say if you took the 100 most influential people on one side, let's say the pro-Trump side, and you said the only thing we're going to mess with is how often the persuadable sliver of the world sees their content. Everybody else can see everything. It doesn't matter because it's not going to change their votes. Could they do that? They could certainly identify who the people they don't want me to see the message, and they could change, for example, which YouTube gets suggested. Would you know the difference if your YouTubes were not being suggested as often to the small sliver of the public that are the influential ones? You wouldn't notice. You might notice something like what I saw with my 17 or 18% who seemed to get automatically unfollowed. It could be that the people who are getting automatically unfollowed, wait for it, are the persuadables. Now, I'm not going to make that claim because I don't have the sufficient data to say that that's true. I'm just saying that it would look kind of exactly like this if there was something going on, some mischief. But we don't know. The fact that we don't know creates the following situation, which I talk about in different contexts. Whenever you have the following variables, you're going to have mischief. The following variables are a huge upside, you either making money or getting power. So there's a huge upside gain that you could get. It is almost impossible to get caught. And there are a number of people involved. The number of people involved is to make sure that there's at least one person who's willing to do something mischievous, let's say. If you only had one person who saw a big upside gain, and there was only one person, and they knew they wouldn't get caught, you might say, well, okay, it's one person. Sometimes that one person will do the ethical thing, and they won't do the thing they could do. If it was just one person, maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. But if you have a number of people, you can guarantee somebody in that number of people is going to take the free money. Big upside gain, either in power or whatever it is that they're trying to gain, no chance of getting caught. In what situation have you ever seen those variables? Gigantic upside gain, no chance of getting caught, and lots of people involved. When those are the variables, when do you not see mischief? Never. In the history of humankind, you've never, not once, seen a situation like that where people, don't jump in and aggressively exploit the system. It's what we do. We're humans, right? You would expect nothing less. So, I would say at this point that the whatever you thought about the republic and about the democracy is over. And we don't have to worry about losing our democratic process because it's already gone. Now, and by the way, I mean that sincerely, without hyperbole. We don't have the same political system we had 10 years ago, and nobody decided to make it that way. Right? We didn't have a national conversation about, hey, let's change our government by really putting the social media platforms largely in control of this stuff. Nobody made that decision. It just sort of evolved that way. That's what we got. Now, I've said before that if I ever reached 1 million followers on Twitter, that I would largely run the world. Meaning that, because again, I'm a skilled persuader, I've studied it, I know how to do it. If my platform were bigger, and I'm just using 1 million as sort of my, there's no science behind that number, it's just a big number. There's somewhere at around 1 million followers, I would be so hard to ignore that I would become part of every conversation. And once I become part of a conversation, it starts changing things. Now, somebody said, look how big your ego is. I'm making a claim that anybody who has my skill set and reaches 1 million followers is going to have this kind of influence. My skill set is simply that I've spent time learning these things. It's not that I'm magic. It's not that I'm smarter than other people. It's that I spend time learning a specific skill set. Anybody could do it. Now you add that to the fact that that I would have more followers, that magnifies the message. So here's the thing. As we're entering this new age of enlightenment, where we understand that voting is not what we thought it was, but rather we're being influenced by all these dark forces, if you want to get your way, the best way to do it, aside from voting, is to boost the voices on social media that are the closest to your own. So I think you're going to see sort of a race to promote certain voices so that they have more influence on social media, because that's the thing. Now, keep in mind that if it's true that I'm being shadow banned or throttled back in any way, and I don't have conclusive evidence that that's the case, but if it were true, the more users I have, the harder it is to make me invisible. So as some number of users, it would be almost impossible to game the system to keep me away from people. So if you want to get your system back, you would find people you agree with. It doesn't have to be me, but just people you agree with who are persuasive, try to boost their social media traffic, and then those voices become sort of the proxies for you.